Alright, good morning everyone. Welcome to the channel. We are back in with another morning of ranting and raving at things that have caught my eye or otherwise. So, good morning everyone. Let me just make sure all the chats are clear. They're good. And yeah, like I said, welcome everyone. Okay, so let's get ourselves in. But first of all, first thing we're going to look at is, make sure I push the right button. There we go. I finally fixed most of the audio issues. I've got to work out, I've got a pretty good idea how to change the settings for the mic stream, but that's okay. I've worked out for post-processing, there's a couple of little bits and pieces I need to do, but we will get there. Plus, I've worked out all the other recordings and everything else. Okay, first things first. It's now spring. Spring has sprung. And the weather down here is in Australia is, southern Australia is getting nice. They're talking about um, 27 degrees. Are we zoomed in enough? We are. 27 degrees in Sydney on Monday, 21 on Sunday. A little bit late for the city to surf, which is usually traditionally a nice sunny day in August, but I don't think it was that sunny this year. But 27 degrees on Monday, with other southern cities early to mid 20s. That's warm for the start of spring. I mean, first week of spring, yeah, quite warm. Now, the whole idea of four seasons and how they fit in various places doesn't always fit very well. I do know that apparently the Aboriginal people in various parts of Southeast Australia had anywhere up to 8 seasons that they marked. And one of the things they marked in the transition from winter to spring was almost like a fake spring. There was a warm period right at the end of winter uh, for a little bit, and then it went back to a cold period again, and then proper spring came up a little bit later on. So this lovely, wonderful warm weather that's coming down the pipeline is not going to hang around. It's going to be cold and wet, or cold again. Um, mid to late uh, mid to late September, rolling through. But hey, look, it'd be nice for the week that it's around. It means everything's going to grow. Have to get out and mow lawns and take care of the garden, all that sort of stuff. And yeah, as it says, it'll be the warmest weather since early May. Well, we've had winter. Um, and yeah, we get the cold front started next week, which is interesting given that they're forecasting that the snow fields, the snow season, is going to stay intact through until the October long weekend. Well and truly, they're going to have a good season through to the end of the traditional end of the snow season. Now, because Australia doesn't get a lot of snow, the traditional snow season is the Queen's birthday, or King's birthday now, June long weekend, through to the October long weekend, which is generally the Labor Day long weekend for the southeastern states. June to October, start of October. It's possible that it will extend a bit further. Well, the season won't. The season tends to end then, but the snow cap will stay for a bit longer this year, I reckon. Although if this weather kicks in, mid 20s, yeah. But yeah, I mean, putting Melbourne up as an example isn't a good one because Melbourne's weather shifts exceedingly quickly. But they're saying it'll drop by midweek back down to the low teens with rain. So, um, or even Sydney dropping back down at almost 10 degrees with rain again. So, yep, if you're there in southeastern Australia, enjoy your weather this weekend and Monday because it's not going to hang around. It's going to be cold and wet again. So, yeah, that'll be uh, that'll be a good weekend for most people, I think. All right, there's a whole bunch of articles and stuff. One of the things that I quickly wanted to look at first, I'm going to make the pretty pictures nice and big. Um, the the raid on John Bolton in the US, kind of interesting. The it marks probably one of the few high-profile FBI raids done under the current Trump administration, and um, the fact it was John Bolton, I mean, seen as a warmonger by a lot of people, seen as a neocon, I think, by a lot of people. Is it going to have an actual article? It is. Now, it came after he published a book. Well, I don't know if that's necessarily the trigger. It was probably the straw that broke the camel's back. And the allegation was that he'd had access to a lot of classified material in writing his book that he probably shouldn't have had access to. Um, I mean, access to classified material when they shouldn't have seems to be a common thread recently. Um, Obviously, they went after Trump at with his presidential material held at Mar-a-Lago. Biden got given a hand wave away for the material that he'd taken well and truly against his access rights whilst a senator and the VP. And he doesn't have, he never, until he was president, didn't have declassification authority. And so there's, yeah, um, that's just messy. But we're not talking about that sort of stuff at the moment. So it's kind of interesting. I mean, Trump's relationship with Bolton had soured. I think people saw when Trump had him in government, well, had him as part of his team at the White House, was that Bolton was the attack dog on a very short leash. And so Trump would go into negotiations with Bolton as holding the extreme position, and Trump would then negotiate the more moderate position that he'd always wanted. And so, I mean, it's one way of doing negotiations. It's not necessarily the greatest way of doing negotiations, but it certainly sends a message when you bring in somebody like Bolton as part of your team, and you point to him and say, look, if you don't do as you're told, or if you don't negotiate with us, this is what's going to happen. You're going to let people like him loose. So it's basically the allegations are obviously that he's had the classified material that he shouldn't have had, and we'll see obviously over time what further comes out. He's obviously labelled stuff relating to Trump, and I'm sure there's material related to others as well. Okay, basically that's a warrant. It's been redacted type stuff. So yeah, interesting raid. It'll be interesting to see what comes out down track, because the Trump didn't uh, in his way that he does things, didn't hold back on what he thought of Bolton after uh, their parting of ways. Seems that if somebody leaves Trump's orbit under other than amicable uh, reasons, they tend to attract a bit of ire down track. It's yeah, it'll be interesting to see what comes down. But it is also interesting to see someone like Bolton actually get targeted. And the question is, well, how much scattered throughout DC and other places is really there? What has just happened to my screen? Huh. Uh, the screen's disappeared altogether. Oh, I don't like that. Bit hard to talk about news if I can't see the news. That is a failure that I didn't think I'd see. Huh, I might have to quit and reopen the browser. That's a very odd failure, that one. Give me 2 seconds. Not seen that before. Okay, so it quit. Hooray, we're back in. That was odd. I closed the tab and the entire screen went blank. Anyway, back into it. Okay. All right, there we are. Okay, so because the article I was trying to bring up, and it's kind of funny that it did disappear like it did, is I only just found out about this. I mean, it's quite possibly been well known in certain circles and things like that, but something called the Venona Project. And what it, I mean, I'm looking at the wiki article here, so there's obviously better resources out there that talk about it in better detail, but it's reasonable for a very quick high level overview. What the Venona Project was uh, an attempt by primarily the US uh, to engage in counterintelligence against the um, Soviet intelligence agencies at the time. And they ran it starting during World War II. So quite obviously they didn't trust their other members of their allies very well. It showed some really interesting discoveries like the Cambridge 5. Hang on, let me make this bigger so everyone can see. Cambridge 5 espionage ring, uh, their awareness of or their penetration of the Manhattan Project, the significance down here. Okay, so yeah, the fact that they had Soviet spies in at the Manhattan Project, that there were a variety of spies working for the Soviets in across various nations, working through the U.S. State Department, Treasury, Office of Special or OSS, and the White House, which is really interesting. That it also um, helped identify the Rosenbergs and Curry was another name that I've heard of elsewhere, and Halperin. So obviously, Western agencies had penetrated Soviet agencies as well. But it was interesting to see that this, I mean, I'm not 100% sure why an article on Venona popped up, but it was what I took away that was very interesting was that the program was running during World War II as well, and well, how deeply it had managed to penetrate break the cryptography. Basically, it was intercepting the messages and breaking the cryptography on it. And apart from the agents that it managed to break and everything else, such as Rosenberg and the Rosenbergs and Fuchs and other people like Guy Burgess, etc. there's been some. I mean, it's obviously helped deal with spying within um, Australia as well, uh, and the allegation there that it's probably Pine Gap was used as part of that mechanism. A remote base in the Australian outback. Well, that's pretty much it. At least that's been publicly declared. And then there was a couple of others. Then okay, yep, Petrov affair and a few other bits and pieces. The one thing though, apart from all that rather interesting stuff that comes up, that I was interested in was how much it uh, how much it contributed to McCarthyism. Whether McCarthy had been fed limited information coming out of the Venona project that then led to his um, helping establish the House Un-American Affairs Committee, which then led to basically accusations of communist activity and socialist activity throughout all number of industries, mainly, well, not necessarily mainly, but throughout a whole bunch of industries, including Hollywood and places like that. Now, the I mean, obviously, there's interesting things there about the decisions whilst the program is running about how much information to be shared. Uh, so, for example, um, General Bradley um, deciding that he wasn't going to tell the White House about it initially because the White House wasn't that good at keeping secrets or leaking information, and therefore it would have destroyed what was an extremely valuable program, and so the president therefore was not receiving sources and means. He was receiving the product of the intelligence, but he wasn't being exposed to what the source and means of collection was, um, nor how it came about. And of course, then that fed into how the president uh, interpreted the actions of other members within the intelligence community. Well, yeah, to a degree, there's a kernel of truth in all aspects. The does it talk about it at all? No. Um, there's discussion of it now. Okay, obviously, there's an axe to grind for some people about, like I said, McCarthy's use of information to have come out of it, or uh, whether it validated what McCarthy was undertaking. Now, I've read in some unrelated books, completely unrelated to McCarthyism, completely unrelated to the House Un-American Affairs Committee, that there were, and this is leading into Vietnam War era operations. So again, there was still very much a concern about the presence of socialists and communists within various industries within the US. The book is talking about stuff which was developed and ostensibly was being used at some point to help the US military, or it failed, but part of the goal was that it was going to be used to help the US military during Vietnam. But the military and I guess the government to begin with was very reluctant, not so much for the technology or the systems that were being developed, reluctant for them to be used. It was the people developing the systems and who nominally come up with what they were. The author of the book said that, look, these people had come under suspicion during um, the HUAC's activities. And oh, yes, we were card-carrying socialists. Yes, we did attend socialism meetings. Yes, my parents were card-carrying communists. Yes, this, yes, that. Oh, but I haven't done it for a few years. And oh, why are you picking on me? I've not done anything wrong. It's like, well, hang on. The whole point of what McCarthyism was setting out to do was to identify these ties and what was going on. Now, the author of the book was quite obviously sympathetic to that viewpoint, not McCarthy's viewpoint, but the um, card-carrying socialist viewpoint, and so I kind of glossed past it. And it's like, well, hang on. There's the whole reason these people have basically justified why McCarthy did what he did, but now we're just sort of wallpapering over it, pretending it never happened. And oh no, 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 they can still do what they want to do because they can do whatever they want to do, and we just pretend that this part of their history and their life never happened. It was, well, for a start, it was interesting to see that come up in a book that was completely unrelated to those matters. There was also allegations that the the focus on these particular individuals wasn't just because of their ideology; it was also because of their ethnicity and their background, everything else. And it's like, well, okay, that may have been coincidental, um, but it was certainly ideology based, and yeah, they just sort of hand waved it away, and away they went. Uh, there was also a link in the book of the actions of these people to Democratic Party actions at the time. Now, there was no allegation or assertion that the socialist leanings or their time spent with the socialist parties had influenced what they then did with the US Democratic Party or anything like that. But it was another set of data points to bolster what McCarthy was doing. And quite frankly, the book took a very anti-McCarthy stance. Eh. So it was interesting, like I said, it was interesting to see an article pop up talking about, well, mainly the when this program was made public and what it did. So I had a look, and it's like, oh, there's quite a bit of information there. Now, the problem with a project so sensitive as this, and I guess as successful as they had been, was knowing how and when to use the information that it captured. Because obviously you don't want to let too many things become known. Otherwise, it tells the people you're collecting information from that you have access to their internal systems or that you can decrypt their messages. And so you've got to be careful, obviously, about uh, how how much to use or uh, how much to release. Yeah, the problems of intelligence and counterintelligence and counterintelligence. Yeah, it's it was certainly very interesting and certainly something I'd be keen to read a bit more about in the future. I mean, I've read about a bunch of various programs and stuff that were being used at the time, but I hadn't heard of Venona under that name before. I obviously heard of some of the people that were identified because of it, but yeah, we'll go from there. This was something kind of funny that came up um, from. Okay, where is the stop making noise? Uh, an article, well, mainly seen on news.com.au, but presumably it's come from other places as well, talking about the age of an actress in, um, well, in My Life with the Walter Boys, where everyone assumed, well, it had been claimed she was only 22, but it turns out she's 33. And so, yeah, okay, people speculated, it's like, okay, she's an adult. Does 11 years of age really make a difference? Well, she's playing a teenage role, playing as a 15-year-old. So, hey, look, if you're 33 and can get away with playing a 15-year-old and people believe that, more power to you. But why I brought this article up is when I was talking about the John Man amnesia effect the other day, about how people will willingly set aside their their knowledge that the media reporting isn't very accurate on a subject that they know of, to then flat out believe what the subsequent articles on other materials say, and despite the fact you've just understood it is unreliable reporting on a given topic, you then trust their reporting on other topics to be completely reliable. Thanks to Michael Crichton for that. The funny line that comes out of this is the one that's highlighted here. I don't know if I zoomed in. Okay, there we go. Zoom in. Several reputable news outlets list her as being 22, and she does not appear to have corrected them. Okay, I don't know that it's up to her to correct it, but the whole idea of I'm a reputable news outlet and got someone's age wrong by 11 years, a third of her actual age. Hey, I'd probably be sitting back and laughing too. If you're um, if you're going to get details that wrong on me, I'd be sitting back and laughing, and I wouldn't be rushing to correct you. I'd be like, let's see how deep a hole you can dig. But that sentence, the more you think about it, the less it makes sense. You got such a big error, but you're still reputable. Okay. Well, who's telling me that they're reputable? Somebody who wants to be reputable too? Yeah, cool. Not cool. Let's close that out. Okay, well, no, there's not much there for that one. Okay, kidney. No, that's not the one I was looking at. Cost of living. No, well, before we get to the cost of living and other things that we've talked about recently as well, this article that popped up, I mean, a bit sad that obviously somebody's died at the peak of their performance and health. Well, I don't know if I'd say health, but peak of their performance within their given profession. Uh, yeah, bodybuilder that has recently won a Mr. Olympia program. This website has horrific videos and stuff all over the place. But anyway, um, earned his way onto the Pro Tour, basically, after winning the Mr. Olympia Amateur competition. And yeah, there's the sudden death of a bodybuilder. Okay, people are immediately going to think that he got his cycling wrong. Yep, completely missed a natty. But performance enhancing drugs of all varieties have all sorts of bad issues with the body. And even if he wasn't, the fact that the bodybuilders will cut, undergo basically severe dehydration regimes to get um, ready for competition, to force greater muscle definition and things like that by dehydrating the body, puts ridiculously stupid pressure on the kidneys. And so let's go with an assumption he's completely natural, so no performance enhancing drugs at all. He may have just killed his kidneys by pushing the dehydration too far, too often, in order to get into performance or get into show ready status. Sadly, though, it's more often than not that these sort of sudden deaths by bodybuilders is related to their use of performance enhancing drugs and getting their cycling wrong, or just the fact they're using them, will often cause issues with the heart mainly, and so yeah, the it, it's possible that there's some bad stuff cycling out there, um, or yeah, it's not a super healthy lifestyle. I mean, lifting heavy weights, putting them back down again, getting muscle definition, all that sort of stuff. They say the day you start lifting in the gym is the day you'll be forever small. And I mean, anyone who's been in the gym any length of time has probably seen people who you'd be looking at for a while going, they may not openly admit it, but they're on gear of some sort. They're taking chemicals that they shouldn't really be taking, putting stuff into their bodies that fundamentally isn't helping them in the long run. Uh, so, yep, it's sad that that's happened. I mean, I wonder whether there'll be more information to come out of it in due course. Yep, okay. Added stress on the heart due to proteins and vitamins and the additional hormones. But yeah, quite obviously getting the balance wrong isn't good for the body. But it seems to be what the competition, what people push for competition, and as a result, yeah, they end up with what they've got. All right, what do we look at next? Okay, I saw the footage for this pop up in a different aspect. They were talking about well, they weren't when they showed the footage. It wasn't talking about Thomas Sewell, the admitted neo-Nazi dude. They just said it was associated with the march and sort of hid the fact that these were the National Socialist Network people. Okay, yep, not nice that they were there, not nice that they were doing what they were doing in terms of the attention they've taken away from the rest of the march and the goals. Okay, they they have a right to be able to be there, whether or not we really like the fact that they are. They came in knowing that there was going to be a fight, knowing that things were going to get physical. Now, is that um, pragmatism? Is that uh, understanding that just by showing up, you're going to attract people who want to punch your face in? Yeah. I mean, when you look at the footage, if you watch it all the way through, and these are obviously screen stills taken from it, they've kept to the side of the road. They haven't marched down the road. They've kept to the footpath. They've basically said, look, we're going to go from here down to Parliament, to the Victorian Parliament, to do the speeches and stuff out the front and basically be on our way. So it seems like they're not advocating for violence. They're not pushing for violence. They've basically got their route clearly marked out. They know exactly what they're going to do, but they've then said, look, counter protesters, i.e. Antifa in this case, aren't going to like what we're doing, and chances are they're going to want to stop us. We're not going to let that happen. And so the inevitable happens, and they're confronted on the bridge, at which point these guys just go, yep, we're not stopping. And yeah, elbows, knees, fists, skateboards go flying. And the marchers are the ones that attract criticism. And it's like, well, if you want to be fair, they weren't the ones that instigated it. It was the counter protesters who came across and instigated. The the people marching certainly showed a willingness not to hold back. They were going to like, no, 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 we're going to get through. The um, the thing that stands out, apart from the fact that the counter protesters were permitted to basically come in and initiate violence or allow violence to be initiated as a result of their actions, was that there was no police presence up until after fists were flying. And that's kind of concerning in a way. because the lack of police presence for what was an organised march and clearly declared route, etc., would imply, well, doesn't imply it. It allows supporters of the march and allows the more extreme voices to basically say that look here, it's clear the government doesn't care about us, the government doesn't care about the people's voice, the government has a very severe ideological slant that it supports the actions of the counter-protesters because police didn't show up until they started getting their skulls kicked in. It feeds a narrative that may or may not be true, but the lack of police protection for their march as opposed to other marches in previous weeks or at that time, it's one of the things where you can be damned by your actions, whether or not those actions have the intent that other people are attributing to it. There may be completely valid reasons for why the police weren't there at the time or why there was inadequate security, but the fact of the matter is they weren't there. And it allows the marchers and the more extreme voices to basically push forward and say quite clearly the government has no desire to support the everyday Aussie, etc. And so it pushes that, um, it pushes that narrative. And people wonder why the discussion tends towards more extreme viewpoints. It's because when this sort of stuff happens and people see that the police weren't there, that the counter-protesters were permitted to start violence, which wouldn't be allowed if they were marching, it and it's the more extreme voices that are talking, it's going to attract support, more support for their positions. When everyone's saying, oh, we want a more moderate take on things, we want to actually have a moderate discussion. Well, the boat on that may have sailed, sadly, particularly when uh, those other things were allowed to happen. Now, playing into this is the actions of the police and actions of the parade don't just happen in isolation. They're not just looking at things as, oh, just because this happened on Sunday morning, hence everything is like this. No, they're looking at years of activity, looking at history of behaviours. And so uh, you've got the marches um, would point to the behaviour of Victorian police during COVID lockdowns and COVID riots, etc., with their suppression of peaceful riots and peaceful activity. Well, declared not peaceful. I mean, I think everybody saw the footage of the grandma getting pepper sprayed in the face. That was from Melbourne. That was a COVID protest march in Melbourne, and they were Victorian police pepper spraying an unarmed grandma in the face for having the the gall to go outside her house during a COVID lockdown. Now, that sort of stuff, even though, funnily enough, during the COVID lockdowns, yeah, people might have said, oh, there were cookers and all sorts of people who were like, no, anti-COVID vax. Again, people who were reluctant to take the COVID vaccination got slandered with all sorts of um, terms that may or may not have been accurate. Uh, a lot of the protests, particularly in Victoria, were actually union-led because a lot of their members were facing economic hardship as a result because, well, a lot of union workers under the CFMEU and those other unions were wage-based. And when the entire industry shut down, no one was getting paid. And the unions clashed with the government on it. And it was, and I talked about it recently as well, particularly with the CFMU being put under administration and bits and pieces, about that was one of the schisms that formed between the unions and the Labor governments, particularly in Victoria, because they felt that their power that they'd previously held or their ability to influence government direction suddenly evaporated. and they didn't like the loss of that power and didn't accept it. And well, unions, when things don't go their way, tend to engage in industrial action. Bit hard when the industry's all shut down, so they took to the streets. And yeah, so a lot of the protests in Victoria weren't necessarily people who didn't want COVID vax and things like that. Were people like the unions who were like, "Hang on, you're killing us. You, if we're not dying from COVID, we're dying from the fact that we have no economic, um, no income. How do we live? That sort of stuff." So, coming back to Sunday, when these marchers see that there was no police presence until after the violence had started, it's like, well, you've allowed it to happen. You've allowed the narrative to be created that there are violent thugs, because you didn't provide protection for what was a well advertised event. Uh, Subsequent, and you see in the later half of the footage after things get settled down on the bridge, that everything resumes peacefully, and they then have police presence out the front. But there's no subsequent attempts to disrupt the march. Everyone just continues peacefully. Yeah, they might be saying things people find abhorrent, but they continue to peaceful march. And yeah, then once they get to the end point there, then they have a bit of a disagreement with uh, the people talking at the time, as well as whether uh, their role in things. Now, they later went on to disrupt, I think they call it the Sovereign Camp. Okay, I wasn't aware that this was a sacred site in Melbourne, but apparently it is. Um, Something akin to the old tent embassy that was out the front of the old Parliament House in Canberra, but in the middle of Kings Park in Melbourne. I'm not 100% sure. Like, I'd only heard of it for the first time on the weekend after it got kicked over. So, uh, yeah, quite obviously the media was like, oh, no, this bad thing. Okay, I'm not 100% sure. Never heard of it before. So, uh, Camp Sovereignty, sorry, there we go. Now, he's been arrested because he then showed up behind the Premier at a news conference she was giving. And all of a sudden people are all upset, like, how did he find where she was? Well, a lot of senior politician movements advertise, oh, we're going to be here to give an announcement on this or an announcement on that, so that the media can show up. I mean, it's public knowledge of of certain activities. So yeah, um, yeah, this was, well, calling Jacinda Ardern a coward. Well, okay, again, goes back to why was he doing that? Hireless, okay, now he's just stirring things up. Um, and this is the thing. He's making points that people agree with. And unfortunately, because everything else is being suppressed, or that person looks familiar for some reason. Because of being suppressed, it draws people into these more extreme positions. And yeah, uh, kind of interesting. I mean, we'll obviously see more and hear more, but obviously people are back and forth, still complaining about what happened and everything else. But it's interesting to see that based on the footage that had come out, how you can see the moderate voicing being not suppressed, being washed away by the actions that took place and were allowed to take place. And I think that's more telling than everything else. So that was interesting. Obviously, he's going to face in court, etc. He'll get something out of it. Speaking of Victoria, not that, Dan Andrews. Um, where are we looking? Dan Andrews. Here we go. Um, he was the Premier in Victoria during COVID and a bit after and everything else. He had issues that he sort of hand waved away to do with branch stacking and a few other bits and pieces. But he's always seemed to skate his way out of things. By the end of it, I think even his most ardent supporters were starting to turn against him. The unions were certainly no fan of him by the end. He attracted the moniker Dictator Dan uh, for what he did through COVID and even before that. He attempted to sign Victoria onto China's Belt and Road Initiative by himself when it was probably, well, when it is something that was being handled at the federal level, and Australia, I'm pretty sure, wasn't signing on. And so he was seen as usurping his authority as a state level premier to engage in foreign affairs. Um, uh, People also referred to Victoria at the time as the Democratic People's Republic of Victoria. Uh, and yeah, certainly the protests and the lockdowns and everything else that surrounded COVID, I I don't think it's left people necessarily with a good aftertaste. And now most people are willing to let bygones be bygones, and no one knew what they were doing at the time. So when he eventually resigned, left office, people were like, "Yep, okay, see you later. Don't come back." The military parade in Beijing over the weekend, so over the last few days, has it attracted news interest from around the world for who attended in terms of world leaders and the perceived um, behaviour of those world leaders. If you'd seen do we have the picture? Yes, the picture of the world leaders right there on the back right. Okay, you can't see the cursor very well, but is Dan Andrews, not an active politician anymore. Now, it was uh, not a surprise for some people. Well, people who'd never liked him in the first place. Not a surprise that he shows up in the middle of a Chinese military parade and wheedles his way into appearing with world leaders as that. Yeah, people who never liked him had basically always assumed he was too big for his boots and was had closer ties to China or trying to maintain closer ties to China than he really should have. But the people who voted him didn't really care about that. Fine. It's a bit like Kevin Rudd. When he was voted in as Prime Minister, the links between him and China were kind of just like people went, yep, cool, whatever. Uh, they were known, and people kind of went, yeah, all right, there's a possible influence here based on personal relationships that they have with other people or the history of people that are close to them. But people have accepted that as part of the overall package. The counter argument when Dan Andrews was in power was, oh no, he's not doing that. No, he's not like that. Generally by media and groups more ideologically aligned with Dan Andrews. Uh, and they were like, always like, why call him Dictator Dan? That's not right. That's not nice. It's a bit hard to counter that argument when he shows up like this. And as it says there, even some of his most, even the most ardent supporters are left trying to justify why he showed up and did what he did. And, well, triple election winning Labour luminary, okay, it's coming from the ABC. He's going to give them a pass anyway. But the allegations or the investigation into branch stacking certainly, I think, was a big factor in his eventual departure from Victorian politics. Now, for the people who don't know what branch stacking is, when Australians vote, they vote based on an electorate, and you vote for your local member. Your local member generally represents one of the two major parties, maybe one of the fringe parties, depending on um, which party it is. They may be ideologically aligned with other parties. They may be actually coalitioned up or in an agreement with other parties to share power, all that sort of stuff. Or they may just say, look, we know we're never going to get into power, but if you vote for us, we're going to then pass your vote on to one of these other parties, preferencing. How you get members or how you get prospective members, how you get people on the ballot in the first place, well, your political parties have to have their own vote and nominate someone. So the local branch of the party will have a meeting, have a caucus, have a backroom, whatever, and they'll have a vote or a series of votes to then select a candidate to then run in the local election. Branch stacking is where you move people between electorates so that when these internal party votes take place, you've already stacked it. You've basically guaranteed, if not completely guaranteed the outcome, you've weighted it in your favour because you've forced in a whole group of people who are ideologically aligned, or you've ensured sufficient union representation. Now, each of the major parties has their own internal divisions and power uh, power splits and things like this. So, for example, even within a party that's seen as progressive like Labor, there are uh, more right-wing elements. There are elements that are probably more conservative. There are also elements that are far more progressive. And similar sort of things on the in the Liberal Party, in the Conservative parties, that there are voices and factions. Factions, that's the word they tend to use, that have a different ideological slant to the official party line. Now, as these factions grow or shrink in dominance or make agreements with other factions, you can see the ideological slant or direction of the party overall change as these factions have power or not have power. And so when you see these power brokers take center stage, they're people who are either good at negotiating the different factions to a common agreement or enough to carry a desired candidate to the forefront. So by the time you, as a voting member of the public, go to put your ballot in the ballot box on election day, the candidates from the major parties have already been through several rounds of pre-selection and pre-selection basically of voting, and have pretty much come out with a fairly clear ideological position based on the faction they represent or the power faction at the time. So branch stacking is moving enough faction members around the place in the different electorates to ensure that the desired candidate rises to the top of the pile and then makes it onto the ballot. And there's no guarantee you're going to make it into Parliament or anything like that. In safer seats, it might be more of a guarantee, but the last couple of elections have shown that even very safe seats on both sides of Parliament are not. Uh, and so it actually forcing local members to do their jobs and represent their local electorate. Good thing. But that's what pre-selection, that's what branch stacking is. And it's a bit like, not gerrymandering in a way, but it's by forcing through the candidates you want to, especially in the safer seats, it means that you know when the members arrive in Parliament, whether you're in government or opposition, you know that you have a faction, a strong faction of whatever ideological slant within the party you want, there and present in the chamber. And so you can then push forward with policies that that faction really, really want. So it might only be a splinter section of the overall party. And so, yeah, you're not necessarily seeing the Labor Party altogether. You're seeing the representative interest of one small section. So things like back in the day when Bob Hawke introduced Medicare, for example. Yep, wonderful, wonderful system that was brought in and subsequent, but that was based effectively on a couple of factions within the Australian Labor Party pushing that. And obviously there was a bit of horse trading. Look, we'll back this if you back that, that sort of thing. Yeah, it's politics on in a microcosm that plays out as well on a macrocosm. And I guess if you want to see where the big ideological shifts happen or the big directional shifts happen, you look down inside the parties at these factions and see who has power. So when they hold caucuses or I forget what the Liberals call their things, but basically they can, when they do their party leader, elect their party leaders and stuff in Parliament or even the head of the party as in general, it's driven by factions. It's not so much driven by, oh, you might be the best person in the end of the day. Well, it's driven by which factions have the most power. And so over time, various factions gain and lose power, and people will pander to certain things in order to attract enough of a power base to carry power. That sort of thing. So yeah, Dan Andrews was getting investigated or was being associated with the branch stacking that had been going on at the time, and people see it as being a grossly unfair practice because the assumption is the person who's arrived on the candidate as a candidate on the ballot deserve to be there by virtue of them basically wanting to represent the local electorate's interests and being elected fairly by the members of the party. Well, if you've stacked the branch, it's not a fair vote, and so the everyday party members, who are the ones who nominally vote a candidate forward, their voices don't carry the day, and so yeah, it's seen as a corrupt practice or an unfair practice. I mean, depending on how much you look down on the practice, you would be whether you see it as just unfair, corrupt, or a way of doing business. Yeah. Yeah. So the link Dan Andrews had with China or tried to form with China, I think were fairly well known, and it just determined as to which media you read or which who you spoke to or listened to as to how much of an influence or how much of an impact that actually had on his ability to conduct his role as premier. And it was certainly one of the things he pushed when he was in power, and the idea that he went and did China visits, official China visits, without telling people what was going on, or the fact that the federal government said don't sign up to Belt and Road, but he did anyway. Uh, yeah, and basically he ignored criticism. He's like, "Oh, I'm in power. Get over it." Yeah, legacy tarnished. Well, I think it's more so people who were his supporters now seeing him for what he was or what he is. I don't think that's cynical. I don't think that's an unrealistic approach. But yeah, not a great look for that. And the fact that um, the media's coming out to why did that not load properly? Okay, yeah, tone deaf, tone deaf. I mean, the the reason for the parade and whatever else to commemorate the end of World War II, not a problem. But the fact people, Helen Clark wasn't too bad. But yeah, there's some interesting names there. Um, plus the focus being on North Korea and Russia and everything else. Yeah, it's yeah, doesn't go well. So yeah, the media's sort of taken a bit of a stain on that. All right. Okay. There's a couple of other bits and pieces. Um, there's a staying with Victoria. The banned machetes, big sharp knives. Uh, and so yep, up to $47,000 fine or up to 2 years in prison if you've found having one, owning one without a good enough reason. And funnily enough, after it, they had there was a police chase just recently where a stolen car was found to be carrying a number of them. Uh, it's confusing. Now, again, it's one of those things where a political decision seems to have been made without the rollout and implementation being effectively understood, carried out, and so it's left the population at large confused about how to define a machete and what classifies as a appropriate use. Because, well, if you get on the wrong side of it, it's quite a hefty pain. I mean, people understand don't use your mobile while driving. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. But yeah, define a machete and define legitimate use. I mean, you could have it legitimate use for work in the garden, lopping branches and things like that. Does that work? I mean, that's one use for them. Has always been a legitimate use. So um, I think it'll take a few court cases before it gets settled down. Uh, and I'm sure people don't want to be the poor sap going through the court case to find out just how much of a blade is considered to be a machete. And of course, people complaining that the government didn't listen to them. Hey, it's the Victorian Labor government continuing on from Dan Andrews. The criticism from outside the state, or even from inside the state, criticism from people on the other side of the aisle, it's always been, yeah, they never listened in the first place. Why are you surprised? And so, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. 13, 13 applications, one granted. I yeah, no. This is going to be either something that gets torn up and thrown out, or it's going to be an absolute debacle. Completely unsurprised, it's probably going to be an absolute debacle. Speaking of absolute debacles, did I get the BBC article on this as well? No, I did not. Okay, RoboDebt. Uh, this was a system, again, an absolute debacle, that was uh, pre-COVID, actually. So, welfare fraud um, in Australia. Now, I've talked about it the other day, where you need to accept the fact that there's going to be a degree of corruption and fraud in a social welfare system if you want to make sure that you get the support to the most needy of people. Like you're going to have to accept that in order to ensure coverage, there are going to be people who are going to exploit the system. If you develop the system to completely exclude the exploiting of the system, chances are you're going to also exclude a portion of the population who is genuinely in need and who should be receiving the support. It's the old better to let the guilty walk free than to hang an innocent man. That sort of concept. Mid 2010s, mid-teens, the federal government introduced a system that was called RoboDebt. It was a automated system that reviewed Services Australia, so Centrelink, details and data about the welfare claims or the various support payments paid out to the Australian public. And I used various mechanisms to identify what was considered to be fraudulent payments, and then sent automated letters, um, and quite often also ceased ongoing payments, and then sent also letters to the people it had identified as exploiting the system, demanding back payment of those payments and sometimes interest as well. Almost 400,000 Australians. So what's that? We assume Australia had a population of, let's call it 30 million at the time. 400,000 is 10% of 4 mil. 4 8s are 32. So you're looking at, uh, well, not quite 1% of the population, but a bit more than 1% of the population being accused of exploiting the welfare system. Now, I don't know what the figures that they normally consider to be welfare fraud, but that seems excessive. And when it was done and everybody hit all at once, it seemed like a very poorly implemented system, even if we assume, and it's a generous assumption, that the targeted individuals were targeted accurately. It would still be poorly designed to go after them all at once. You'd want to ensure maybe a test tranche of individuals just to make sure that, yep, we've correctly identified, manually review the cases, make sure that it's not putting an economic burden on individuals too much, because you've now potentially ceased a significant portion of their income, and tell them to pay back something that money they don't have. And so the system did not work. Not just didn't work in terms of they went after too many people at once, it didn't work. It failed in its central remit to correctly identify fraudulent behaviour. And it indicated what a lot of people have been saying all along, a lot of consumers and people receiving services or attempting to receive services, that the internal management of data by Centrelink/Services Australia was subpar, and that people were getting payment, and people who put their hand up and said, look, we're getting the wrong payment here because we've told you that I'm now working, we've told you that this is the income, we've told you that this is happening, but your system hasn't reflected it, or it hasn't caught up to the change in circumstances, or it hasn't done this. And then a lot of them were change of circumstances ultimately. There are also cases where people were like contractors or wage-based earners who had started employment within the financial year, and so the estimates of income were vastly inaccurate, because they then compare the estimate that you'd provided ahead of time to Centrelink with your resulting ATO tax return or taxation, and when the two had a big split, oh, fraud, away you go. Well, you've applied for your Centrelink benefit ahead of time. There's no guarantee that the wage job that you've just picked up is going to hang around. You might still be within the windows to notify Centrelink and correctly update information, but by that time you've earned X amount of dollars that is now taxed through the ATO, and so the system has a lot of lag in it, isn't catching up anytime soon. Well, until it does all at once, and you're suddenly threatened with collections because you haven't paid back things. Now, in addition to not working, it effectively was the government slandering, libeling, hang on, slander is spoken, libeling hundreds of thousands, and slandering because the government came out and said, oh no, this is 100% accurate. Why don't you trust the government? Well, because you're the government. The last thing last thing anyone should do when the government comes along and says, trust us, is trust the government. The worst thing about it was well, one of many worst things about it, is that it suddenly declared hundreds of thousands of Australians as welfare cheats, as financial fraudsters. And, well, when there were either legitimate errors or issues within the government system itself causing that, it's unfair to blame the individual who's done their best to remedy it and give accurate information and declaring them a cheat. And declaring someone a welfare cheat is always a bit of an undercurrent of, it's always a bit of a it's never been something nice to call someone. Calling someone a dull bludger or a dull cheat, it's basically accusing someone of lacking morals, not being an effective part of society. No, people understand, yet welfare's there for a reason, but cheating the system was always seen as something that was a step too far for most people. So when the government turns around and accuses hundreds of thousands of Aussies of being welfare cheats without allowing a process of, um, well, counterclaim or a process to remedy, it it didn't help. It's like basically you've been declared a cheat, but we're not giving you a pathway to review or effectively remedy the situation if it was one based out of error. And so there is a societal impact where people get to find out, or you people will talk about it and say, look, hey, we got this letter, did you get one, all that sort of stuff. When the government is putting out this message that people getting these letters were cheats, it doesn't help. And it's going to put burden on people, especially people who are like, no, I've been honestly dealing with the government, with the system. I've always told it and given the correct information. The fact the internal systems failed is not a fault of the individual, it's a fault of the system. But it's now the individual carrying the burden of the failure of the system. And so it, yeah, declared, so in addition to failing spectacularly, it attempted to claw back debts that didn't exist. And so there were tens of thousands of people on legitimate welfare payments who were legitimately receiving support through the system and should have continued to legitimately receive support through the system, who suddenly faced a cessation of those payments, a demand for those functions to be repaid. And a lot of these people were not just living paycheck to paycheck, they were behind paycheck to paycheck. They weren't getting paychecks. Every dollar received was going to support cost of living, be it public housing, be it um, as cheap groceries as they could possibly find. They'd generally be behind the curve on utilities payments, rent payments, all sorts of bits and pieces. They didn't have tens of thousands of dollars or whatever the amount being declared. They didn't have that to be paid back. Well, because they'd used it to stay alive. And so all of a sudden the government cut off those payments and demanded all the money back. It's going to cause issues when someone's already downtrodden and underfoot in the most vulnerable part of society. It's going to have problem. And then when people make a good faith effort to engage with the agency to try and resolve the situation, uh, it it didn't work, doesn't work, and sadly, it broke some people to the point that they took their own lives. And so it can be shown that there was a direct consequence of this of this false accusation by the government that resulted in people's deaths because the government had, well, overstepped its own bounds in it and made very, very much false positions. And it also, Centrelink/Services Australia, also handing those debts off to debt collectors who aren't known for their velvet glove approach to recovering debt. and the sort of pressure that they'd put on people. And so some people saw the only way out was the extreme way out. As a result, now, the reason it's back in the media again is that um, yeah, and people were unable to, they wouldn't accept, the government wouldn't accept appeals, etc. The the reason it's back in the news again is that, where is it? I did see it. The government has now agreed to pay $475 million in compensation, and it's the largest class action payout in Australian current legal history, with costs taken to 548 million. Sadly, it's too late for some people, and I doubt that it's going to remedy the pain and heartache that it's caused. It's I don't think it's enough to make good what it did, but the question is, well, how much can you make good? Um, and yeah, I mean, it's a lack of compassion. Well, it's the government. Government doesn't have compassion. The wheels of government grind on. Doesn't care who gets stuck between them. And yeah, it was again quite often the most vulnerable in society that people just didn't listen to in the first place, who were most affected by it, and people are becoming a statistic. Now, when COVID happened a couple of years later, people say you've got to trust the government and everything else. Well, we've just come out of a system where the government got claims of welfare fraud horrendously wrong, and we're now being told to trust the government explicitly on something where even, well, the science wasn't changing, the science remained unchanged, where people's understanding of the science was changing so fast that uh, contradictory statements were coming out continually about what should or shouldn't be done to limit the spread and the effectiveness of those actions and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, coming so soon on the heels of the Robodebt issue, little surprise that there are a whole bunch of Australians who distrusted the government completely. Um, it is good to see that there is a bit of compensation coming back to help people, but I don't know that it's necessarily going to be enough to undo the damage that was caused by the government. And it was something that they celebrated. Now, there's a similar thing in the UK, not a Robodebt issue, but if you look up, it's to do with Royal Mail. I think it's Royal Mail. Basically, it's a post office thing. The UK government, and I don't think it was a Hitachi system. It was a Japanese company owned the system, but I don't know if they developed it. But basically, there was an electronic system that they pushed down onto the local post office operators. Now, some of the post offices were, I guess, branded offices and run by the system, but a lot were independent contractors. And Australia has a similar sort of thing too. Smaller towns, the post office is run by a contractor. They've basically got the franchise in a way. Seems odd that Post is run under a franchise system to run and offer postal services locally. Not so much, I don't think, on the delivery, but in terms of the storefront and uh, connecting into the system that way. Similar sort of thing in the UK. Now, there was a requirement for them, these independent contractors running the post offices, to use a common software system, like a business process type system, software as a service type thing. However, there were some fundamental mathematical errors within the system, and so transactions were vanishing out of the system. Basically, the tills wouldn't balance at the end of the day because the system had lost record of the transactions. So the transactions, okay, speaking from a computer data software database concern, the transactions, i.e., the data going in and out of the database, were going missing, which then meant the financial transactions, i.e., what's going in and out of the till, weren't lining up, weren't being accurately captured. And because there was this discrepancy that was then formed and identified, the higher ups in the mail system, in the post office system, turned around and said, no, we trust this electronic system explicitly and implicitly. Any deviation is the fault of the franchisee, and you've been fraudulent, and we're going to claim that back and slander you and drag you through the mud, etc., because there's no other reason for it, because our software system is beyond reproach. After quite a number of post offices went through the same instance, the there should have been red flags being run up continually that, well, hang on, just how common is it that a post office franchisee is likely to engage in financial fraud? Well, if you're getting any more than one, you need to question why there's such a trend. What's causing the trend, especially if they're all apparently committing fraud in the same way, in what appears to be a systemic method? Maybe the system itself has an error. If you're encountering systemic problems or systemic errors or systemic fraud, chances are it's your system. And as it turned out, it was an error inside this business process software that they'd forced everyone to use. That meant ultimately the electronic record of what was taking place did not match the actual record of what happened. Now, there may have been random discrepancies between till keepings and etc. Blah 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 blah. It happens. That's the reason there's a little bit of a float often to account for variations through the day or whatever. But again, fundamentally, it took quite a lot of public outcry, and I believe also, sadly, a couple of deaths before they went back and reviewed the system. And the higher ups went, not our fault. Well, you're the one that pushed the system down on the end user. They're like, oh, we're just gonna wash our hands of it and it's all good. Bye. See you later. Yeah. Always be suspicious when the government's turning around saying, hey, we're going to use this wonderful electronic system to keep tabs on you, to do this, to do that. Trust us, it works. Yeah. When it doesn't work and you're the poor sap that it doesn't work for, you'll get ground into dust between the wheels. But yeah, that was the reason why that popped up into the news again. Cost of living type stuff. The interesting thing here, and we talk about difficulty with infrastructure and renewables and everything else. Yeah, okay, obviously governments have to allocate money to things. There's a scheme in Tasmania, other Victoria, to provide interest-free loans to allow residents to install basically solar systems, but energy efficient items. So better insulation, putting solar on the systems, making the houses more energy efficient, and make that money interest free from the government. You'd still pay it back, but with no interest. Well, only been running for a couple of years, had to cease because of high demand and running out of funds. A victim of its own success. In a perfect world, they'd continue it and find the funds from somewhere else and continue to improve the efficiency of the housing and home solar and things like that, and helps reduce loads and impacts and blah 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 blah. Yeah, it you've got a good system, but you underestimate how popular it's going to be, or just how great the need actually is in the community for these sort of services or these sort of things. Yeah, perfect world. Release more money. Find a way to get more money. Release it. Continue the program. Take it out of something that no one else likes. Yeah, improves the standard of living for everybody. But yeah, hopefully we'll see it come back. Even for other southern states who have cold winters and everything else. I mean, another article about, um, well, a UK um, millionaire talking about inequality. So we're talking about mainly societal class divisions. People say they don't exist. They kind of do. Uh, the wealthy accumulating wealth faster than everybody else. The, I mean, there are figures showing that coming out of things like the global financial crisis, coming out of COVID, the ultra wealthy consolidated and increased their wealth, whilst um, the working poor, the everyday wage slave, fell behind. And that there is a growing schism, a growing split between them all. Some people point to economic figures showing basically a declining middle class, an evaporating middle class, uh, which the evolution of which was one of the positive outcomes of the Industrial Revolution, and the idea that people sort of hoped that eventually the working poor, the underemployed, etc., would move up out of those effectively impoverished levels of employment and standards of living to the middle class. Maybe not into wealth, but certainly into a far more secure standard of living. Well, when the middle class has effectively evaporated, um, you've got very few making the jump to the wealthy class. A lot have fallen back into paycheck to paycheck or worse. And so, yeah, he's looking at things like housing and stock and the fact that, well, if your income's going to try and secure housing and things like that, you're being excluded from pathways that would have had you up into the middle class or into those areas, and that continuing to be a tenant as opposed to a landlord means that your income that goes into housing is fundamentally boosting the bottom line of somebody who's already got a decent bottom line in general. I mean, there's still the whole mum and dad investor type thing, holiday home / investment property things here in Australia. But again, even that attracts criticism. People say that it's largely the baby boomers or uh, holding on to property, or the fact a lot of investment property has been turned around to short-term leases like Airbnb, which puts a greater impost on people trying to live in those regions who would normally be going for long-term leases. But the financial attractiveness of the shorter-term lease is, well, more money in the short term, and the ability to more rapidly react to people wanting to give you money, whereas a long-term lease takes you away from that. All sorts of bits and pieces. So uh, it again, look at who's talking about it. Not a surprise that they're talking about it, but yeah, it is interesting, I guess, to see ongoing articles about the social affairs type thing. This is, well, got a lot of coverage here in Australia. I mean, we've got an article on the ABC, an article on SBS, an article on Channel 9, an article on the Sydney Morning Herald about Ben Roberts Smith VC. who was fighting against was it Channel 9? No, 9 newspapers. So they made allegations that he was involved in some incidents in Afghanistan around the time that the incidents that he was awarded the VC for took place. But the allegations were that the actions he was involved with and may have been directly involved with or partook in amounted to war crimes. And so he came out swinging, saying, "I'm a VC, blah blah blah. You're alleging war crimes. It's besmirching my reputation. It's a whole bunch of things." Now, there'd been the Brereton report, and there'd been a bunch of other investigations into the actions of special forces, Australian special forces in Afghanistan. There'd been footage of what appeared to be extrajudicial executions of Afghani um, civilians, and the determination of combatants versus non-combatants sometimes appeared a bit more fluid than it should have been. And so there was a lot of focus applied to um, SOTG, I think they were called, Special Operations Task Group. And I believe that there's still some ongoing investigations. People felt that there was maybe a bit of a cover-up, that even the internal investigations weren't going to bring people to account for what they did or alleged to have done. Um, and of course, you then had people going back into Afghanistan to interview the affected people. And then there was basically the feeling that there would be no justice for what took place. Right, background covered. And so Channel 9 had made, through their newspapers, had made allegations that Ben Robert Smith VC had been involved with some of those incidents. And so he then launched a defamation claim against them. And basically there was QCs, SCs, KCs coming out of the woodwork on both sides. Channel 9 basically very deep pockets. Ben Roberts VC, not so deep pockets, but he was working for Channel 7 at the time, and owned by Kerry Stokes, and Kerry Stokes backed him to the hilt. And so Kerry Stokes had very deep pockets. So whilst the actual case was Ben Roberts VC versus 9 News or 9 Media Group, in essence it was Channel 7 versus Channel 9, with Ben Roberts sort of as the piece on the chessboard being moved around. So that's why you had two very well-funded media groups going up against each other over what, quite frankly, was very serious allegations. A lot came out during that series, during the initial series of court cases, and it left a bad taste in the mouth for a lot of people. There were suspicions that the VC award had been a political thing, that there may have been more deserving people out there um, who hadn't received recognition for their actions. There were concerns as well about subsequent actions and attempts to intimidate, well, apparent attempts to intimidate witnesses, attempts to influence what was going on. It was, yeah, there was a lot of mud that came out of the woodwork. And given the organisations involved that were funding or actively engaged, they wallowed in that sort of stuff. Uh, the basically his attempt to so what's happened is Ben Robert Smith QC, not QC, VC, has taken the defamation ruling against him to the High Court, attempting to get it overturned on appeal. But the High Court has refused to hear the case. And so there is no further legal pathway for him to reverse the defamation ruling. Now, the court of public opinion has pretty much already come down against him, and has been that way now for a little while. It's the legal stance, the legal outcome of has also now, it appears, come down against him, and it comes into things that, um, well, as Robert Smith VC says, there were spiteful allegations, that there were people with an axe to grind coming in left, right, and centre, and it contributed to, well, it was tied into or contributed to or seen alongside a bunch of inquiries that were going on into special forces in Afghanistan, even special forces in general, and yeah, it didn't come at a good time for them. Uh, to the point that I was told that even the War Memorial had removed his items from display in the VC hall because of the allegations and everything else that was going on. But you can see he's got a couple of interesting. I mean, obviously got the VC. I believe that's a gallantry decoration. Iraq deployed on operations type things. Meritorious unit citation, but he wasn't present at the unit when that was awarded. So he's serving at a unit that's had a meritorious unit citation, and I'm not sure what that's a unit citation for, but he was there when that was awarded. Yeah, so plus the sort of allegations that were coming about his conduct as an individual, what he was like as a soldier, all that sort of stuff. There was, yeah, a lot of scuttlebutt running around at the time. And continuing to fight it as openly as he did and publicly as he did just meant that more and more of that stuff kept falling out of the woodwork, and some of it was an own goal. Um, Obviously, he felt that his reputation was being slandered and or being diminished because of the reporting against him. And I mean, sure, if you feel that's the case, fight it. But as more and more evidence came out, or more and more stuff came out that was accepted as evidence, it seemed that his case just got worse and worse. So yeah, this was basically on a point of law as opposed to on a point of the material understanding of what took place. Also, then there's issue of costs because it was very expensive, very, very expensive. Um, and even here, Channel 9 saying, look, he's done this maliciously, so apply a punitive factor to the awarding of costs. Um, but yeah, the appeal said, look, no, not really. It is, I guess, good eventually to see that the um, case is now finished. It dragged on for a long time. And like I said, it's attracted, even today, it's attracted attention from Channel 9, ABC, SBS, Sydney Morning Herald, and I'm sure uh, there'd be other news coverage as well. Uh, maybe in hindsight he should have just taken the hit when they first published and kept his mouth shut, and things everyone would have forgotten about it. I mean, he would have felt slighted by it, but um, I certainly think that things like the degree of complicity in murder of unarmed prisoners yeah, I don't know that we're going to see him lose the VC as a result. I don't think it'll go that far, but yeah, it's certainly a lot of details came out because he chose to fight. Probably wouldn't have, and yeah, so well I can close out those ones, but yeah, I mean. SBS would have a slightly interesting take as well because they're probably more interested in um, what Afghanis think. Uh, there you go. The costs are expected to exceed $30 million for uh, the trial and appeal, which were what, not even half a year, not even 6 months worth of work. Well, I'm sure there's other work behind the scenes, but not even 6 months of trial, and it's costing probably 30 plus million. Um, yeah, it's the details of the claims. Look, I don't want to repeat them. You can go look them up, and it was found that the claims of what took place were, well, worthy of being publicised. And as the closing statement says there, whilst it's alleged that he was involved in war crimes, he's maintained his innocence, but has not been charged with criminal wrongdoing. Like I said, though, the court of public opinion has well and truly shifted against him in regards to the claims that took place. Yeah, especially in the context of the broader issues of what was going on with the special forces at the time. Okay, what else has happened overnight? Um, Jacinta Price. She's a very polarizing character. Uh, she, I guess, first came to prominence, or most people fully became aware of her in the discourse around the vote, the referendum for the voice, which was allowing unelected representatives of, well, I won't say Aboriginal communities because I think it was like Aboriginal people as a whole, but I mean they've all come from uh, the people of, say, central western New South Wales are very, very different to the people of northern Australia. They have different demands and had different cultural experiences. But the idea of the voice was that Aboriginal people would be given an unelected position or a seat effectively into, if not into cabinet, but certainly into um, very heavy political decision making. Well, by and large, and it was uh, very polarizing, a lot of the coverage about it. Anybody who was against it was slandered as being racist. Um, and you certainly have people saying, oh no, we've got to certainly create this because people are underrepresented, they don't have a voice, etc., etc. Nothing is stopping them from appearing as a candidate and representing their local electorates, etc. And if they are not elected, then they're obviously not representing what the people around them want, or maybe going at the state level as a senator. All right, maybe there just isn't the depth of interest to support those cases or support those causes, despite what you might see in media. You also had people with Aboriginal heritage coming out against the voice. Now, the assumption, rightly or wrongly, that a lot of people had at the time was that if you were of Aboriginal heritage, that you would be backing the voice because it will allow you to have a greater say in things. Whether that say was an appropriate say or not, well, that's a separate issue. The eventual split on voting was very eye-opening, and I'm kind of surprised that there wasn't more investigation or wasn't more reporting or papers written on, as in academic investigation, and papers written on the split of voting. But a lot of the support for the voice came out of urbanised centres in Southeast Australia, well, basically the cities. And the greatest rejection of the voice came from the rural communities and regional areas where the Aboriginal population was the greatest. I don't think it was racist to say that the closer people lived to um, the Aboriginal populations, or the greater percentage of Aboriginal population within an area, the more people voted against the voice. Uh, Even to the point that you're left scratching your head wondering why areas that were predominantly Aboriginal voted against it. Either they didn't understand it, and people said, oh, it failed because the messaging failed and people didn't understand what it was supposed to be. Well, I think people understood what it was meant to be. It's just people didn't want it. But anyway, uh, Jacinta Price, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce her middle name, rose to prominence as one of the voices against. I think she was initially for a little bit, and she even swapped, even changed political direction as a result of it. She was one of the most vocal voices against, and because of her Aboriginal heritage, people felt they couldn't criticise or critique her position, and yeah, it kind of undid the voice, which I think was a bad idea in the first place. I mean, we don't have laws saying you can't be elected to Parliament if you're Aboriginal. There's nothing like that. So if people feel underrepresented, then they should politically activate like that. You shouldn't be given a position of authority like that, or a position, an unelected position like that, to have such a great impact on resulting policies and implementations. Plus, there's also a concern about how people were going to be appointed to that role. Um, the moment you create a position of power like that, especially one that's unelected, you start attracting the wrong sort of attention. But anyway, so Senator Price, as weighed into the whole migrant questions of migrant issues and stuff that's going on. In the wake of the rallies over the weekend, and she's focused on the Indian community. Now, obviously, I talked yesterday about how declaring the Indian community as one sort of monolith is not necessarily a good idea, because there are many cultures within India, and uh, that it would be um, incorrect to assume that uh, a Sikh has the same interests as a Hindu or a Muslim from India, and that's just based on sectarian lines. Um, there are still lingering splits based on caste designations, even if castes technically shouldn't exist anymore. Um, Even different regions within India have very different focuses, be they more urbanized, technical focused, or agricultural, that sort of thing. That, yeah, just bracketing everyone as one bucket doesn't work. And so she's come out and basically said, too many Indians arriving. And so people are getting a bit upset at that, saying, she said that Labor's mucking things up, too many Indians coming in. And um, I mean, she's right to say that raising concerns about migration doesn't mean that you're racist, but it's it's one of those things of that she says she didn't say it or didn't bring it up, and blames the reporter. Well, quite possibly it might have been. I haven't actually seen the original statement she made. That um, it was almost like, well, targeting of any one specific ethnic group in migration, well, is often seen as racism. But is there a point to be made? Is she accurate that they will soon become the largest migrant group to the nation? And what does that mean? Um, and is it being done for political purposes? It's an interesting bow to draw, for sure. It's an interesting line to be made, and well, quite clearly, people are clutching pearls and saying that it's not good and no, we don't want this and that's it's bad things to say. It's like, well, okay, yep, it was certainly tone deaf. Is there anything to what she has said that is accurate? Is there anything that she has said that maybe she didn't find the right words for, but is pertinent to the ongoing discussion? Okay, the original migration path for Chinese and Indians, the as I said here, was skilled migration. Okay, that's what everyone's been saying we want more of. But then they've moved to allow family reunion. Okay, so that's bringing in family members who may or may not have skills. Um, Family reunions, hey, not a problem. No, family reunions a great thing. Um, but if that's diluting the availability of skilled migrants, then it needs to be recognised that, okay, a skilled migrant might then chain migrate, which is, I think, a US term, uh, 5 to 10 other people. Okay, well, they're going to have different demands on the Australian system. I mean, there may be children who need education. Um, they're also all going to need healthcare. They're not all going to be working as skilled workers. They shouldn't be working as skilled workers. Um, Otherwise, they can be migrated under employment categories. But it's, I mean, it's humane to let people rejoin their families or have their families rejoin them. But if it is having an impact on the balance of skilled migration, or it represents massive numbers coming in that may not have been initially accounted for, okay. But the statement that went along with it and how it was made, yeah, could have been made a lot better. Um, and yeah, it's sowing divide where if it was raising a proper question or a valid questions, yeah. Um, And, well, yes, I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that there's large populations, particularly in Victoria. If you ever see the Indian cricket team playing Australia on a Boxing Day test and look at the fact that their MCG's pretty much sold out, but you look at the balance of Indian flags or Indian supporters to Australian supporters and Australian flags, you'd be forgiven for thinking this was being played in India or in Indian home ground because of the proportion of supporters. It's great to have supporters of the visiting teams show up in such numbers and to be so vocal. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's just compared to, say, when the English cricket team visits or a team from pretty much any other nation visits, they don't get support on that level. There is a very strong level of support um, amongst the Indian community for their sporting teams, etc. But it goes to show how strong the community is in Victoria and maybe other major cities around Australia so they can fly down and see it. But how strong the community is within Australia that they can do that. And um, then also what cultural values they bring with them and everything else. So it's one of those things of should she be forced to apologise for what she did? Well, did she actually say what was reported, or was that a misleading statement by the reporter. Well, I mean, both could be true. Both could be true. Um, but I think the way the ongoing reporting's focused on it doesn't help. Really doesn't help. The article yesterday, or the initial discussion yesterday, it was talked about being raised in Parliament about there being attempted, well, they should be focused on um, not allowing Australians to fight with dual citizenship to fight in conflicts where one of those citizenships exist, or dual nationals. Now, again, specifically, that seemed to come out in regards to uh, Israel and Gaza, and the, I guess, the impost on Israelis to serve a period of conscription. Um, there's been this sort of discussion pop up from time to time. It certainly appeared in the late 90s with the breakup of Yugoslavia. There were people who went like with very strong family ties back to the new nations now that were the former Yugoslavia, that went back and fought for various groups, um, fought on various sides. I mean, that certainly happened back then. There is the more recent cases of people who went and fought for Islamic State in Iraq and other places, and also the war brides, Islamic State brides, particularly from people who went in willingly to go to those areas to do that. There is the question about what should happen to them afterwards. Um, and I made the point yesterday that it it depends on who you're going to fight for, and whether or not those nations or those belligerents are in the good books or the bad books. So, for example, like I said yesterday, there is a former Australian soldier heading up the military of the United Arab Emirates. There are Australians through defence contractors providing training, or even through defence providing training to foreign militaries or to um, fighters in various conflicts. I mean, there's articles about Australian involvement in training of Ukrainian troops, for example. But at the same time, there's also articles about a former US Marine, I believe, a basically former US serviceman who's was last sitting in jail in Australia, fighting deportation to the US because the company he worked for in South Africa was providing training to the Chinese military aviators. And so, well, that was like, oh, no, we don't want that. You're going to be jailed for that. Now, had that training been provided to another nation's military, yeah, people probably wouldn't have cared. Like, oh, yep, they're our friends. Go on with it. And so, it's almost like it's it's well, one thing that okay, it's understandable why people want to go back and fight for places they have very close ties to, but at the same time, it's should be done with caution that, well, you may be cutting your ties to Australia completely because Australia is not in favour of the belligerents that you're going to fight for or the conflict that you're going to go be involved with. At the same time, the conflicts that they're currently in favour of may turn out to not be so good. I've spoken to people who were engaged in combat operations in Iraq post 2003 who have subsequently gone through a crisis of confidence about, and these were people who served with the military, so it wasn't a case of they went and did it off their own back. This was, I served with the military, I wanted to go do this, who then had a crisis of confidence when they finally stopped to consider the legality or the appropriateness of the conflict over there and their involvement in it. and so there was almost like a complete 180 in their position on it. And yeah, it, it it came at a cost to them. It hurt them deep, um, and it also then basically influenced how they then subsequently looked at anything the government said, um, because they'd believed what they'd been told up to that point. Um, so this happens. This article, this sort of stuff comes up from time to time, and uh, will we see something formalised out of it? Possibly, because he's picked a scene that the current government is probably in favour of. The um, funnily enough, what I was just saying before about factions in the political parties, well, he lost his position in the cabinet because of a faction fallout. So maybe he's trying to get his position back. But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's some other stuff there about John Howard, former Prime Minister's interpretation of Albanese's declaration that he's going to recognise Palestinian statehood. Um, I mean, there's reasons why the governments in the past haven't done it. Um, I don't know that it's necessarily populism. They're certainly trying to win some political points right now, but I don't think that's going to. The long-term consequences of it don't seem to have been considered just yet. Well, we'll see what happens. But yeah, no, the idea that um, well, they've targeted Israel specifically, but dual nationals fighting in foreign conflicts, whether that should be prevented. I mean, in general terms, I think it's fair, but if they're specifically tying it to um, Israel and Gaza, I don't think that's appropriate. That seems to be more uh, of a targeted thing that shouldn't have been targeted. But anywho, anything else here? No. No, yeah, cost of shopping, cost of goods. Fizzy drink now 50 plus of slab, and uh, they're pointing out that a carton of beers is cheaper. Yeah, when the fizzy drink, when the soft drink is more expensive per um, per unit than beers, I think that's time for people to stop and think. Well, one, do you really need it? Two, what's going on with pricing? So yeah, uh, that's weird. It's odd. Just yeah, one-off pricing maybe. And the last thing to look at today. Oh, look, a follow-on article to yesterday's or the other day's article about what's her name, Ursula von der Leyen, um, being her aircraft being affected apparently by GPS jamming. Okay, this is rehashing. Now, I'd almost argue that this is now straight up propaganda, not taking a pro-Russia line, but given the statement, okay, so the BBC article from the other day was based on initial reporting by the Financial Times a few days previously, and blah, blah, blah. So there's actually a chain where they're already second, third hand reporting. It's not prime reporting. It's like, okay, well, I've reported what somebody else said, time to move on. Oh no, time to crack out more articles. Despite the fact there were very clear claims, very clear statements in those previous articles. Firstly, by the Russians saying it wasn't us, then by the aviation authorities saying there is no evidence that it was the Russians, and that there are many reasons why this sort of stuff happens, and the fact that there is um, GPS disruption in and around conflict zones shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. And a clear statement that there has been no evidence that Russians engaged in the jamming. Very, very clear statements that that was the case. But that doesn't stop articles like this appearing by the same news organisation after already publishing those previous articles. Right, so maybe things have changed. So let's have a look. All right, so the difference is we've now got Sweden's air agency, Swedish Transport Agency, sorry, saying that there's been a rise of disruptions, reported rise of disruptions to the almost the daily incidents, and that the source of the interference is Russian. And everybody accuses Russia of doing it, and Russia says, nah, I can see why Russia would want to ensure disruption of GPS over its territory, particularly when Ukraine is lobbing cruise missiles against it, particularly Western-sourced cruise missiles that would use GPS guidance. And so disrupting GPS is a means of self-protection, electronic warfare self-protection. Yeah, no, it happens. Right, they're protecting the territorial integrity from weapons that are being employed in theatre. That's not that's not an illegal practice. Will that have spillover? Yeah, it's radio frequencies. It has spillover. But okay, whatever. Is it specifically being targeted against air traffic outside of Russia or maritime traffic or other users outside the region? It doesn't look like it. But yep, there's statements that may have been throwaway statements on serious and a safety risk for civil aviation. It's um, well, they're saying that it's spreading in extent. Well, okay, fine, but at the same time, um, there are more advanced weapon systems being introduced into the Ukrainian theatre that, well, it would be silly for Russia not to do anything to try and prevent their use or their effective use, just as it would be silly for the Ukrainians to not engage in electronic self-protection against GLONASS, which is was the Russian equivalent to GPS. In fact, there's many different GNSS systems out there. So there's GPS, which is American owned. There's GLONASS, which was Russian. I don't know how complete their constellation is. Um, there's Galileo, which is EU based. And again, I'm not sure, I haven't seen for a while how complete their constellations are. There's a Chinese system as well, I forget the name of. And I'm sure that there's other systems out there that are seeking to establish some sort of space-based navigation support system. Okay, so if the Russian weapons were using GLONASS, GLONASS, SARSAT, no, that's search and rescue beacons. Now it's GLONASS. Now, if Russian military hardware was using their GNSS system for guidance, it would make sense for the Ukrainians to ensure that those signals were not being received over Ukraine, so as to degrade the navigational accuracy and therefore the weapon accuracy, the accuracy of those weapons. Fair enough. Self-protection. So again, the question of this now, yep, okay, the correct process is raise it with ICAO and say, look, hey, these things are going on, and ensure that, yep, any disturbances outside the region or to civilian traffic are not ongoing. And there comes a time also when you're calling wolf. I mean, there was accusations for quite a while that the Russians had been complicit in the bombing / rupture of the Nord Stream pipeline running through the Baltic. Well, I don't think many people really believe that. I mean, it was reported quite readily, but I doubt people who um, thought about it for any length of time really believed that the Russians would bomb that pipeline themselves, especially so far from any Russian territory. Certainly, they had very little to gain, in fact, nothing to gain from having such an action. And there were plenty of people who did have lots to gain who had access to that site um, in the lead up to the disruption. But anyway, again, the article basically says, oh yeah, claims, claiming, regularly blaming, claiming that there are strategies to sow disorder and undermine European security. Okay, so Moscow denies accusations, and again, no proven link between Russia and the rise in GPS jamming. Okay, so what's the point of the first half of the article then? You've buried it halfway down. It's a repeat of the statement from the previous article, which is there is no proven link. But no, we're going to continue to ramp up the rhetoric. We're continuing to pump up opinion and allegations as truth. People aren't going to read three-quarters of the way down the article to see the line, oh, there's no proven link. They're going to take what's been said and go, oh, this is exactly what's going on, despite the counterclaims, despite the denials, despite the lack of evidence. And, okay, fine. They've even gone back to the Financial Times article again. So that's now the second BBC article pointing back to that previous article. Again, no change. Nothing's changed. I mean, fundamentally, nothing's changed in the overall picture. What's changed is the Swedes are now saying, oh, yeah, they're jamming it. All right. Noticeable increase in GPS incidents since the start of 2022, since the invasion of 2022. Again, no one should be surprised by that. No one should be surprised by that. And now you've got this blatant misrepresentation of GPS navigation. This is inflammatory rhetoric that while planes can rely on other forms of navigation than GPS, jamming at mid-flight can increase the risk of collisions, either with other planes or by causing the pilot to unintentionally fly into the ground, water, or other obstacle. Someone's watched too many action movies. Turning GPS off is not going to make a plane fall out of the sky. If it does, the pilots flying it should never have been allowed to become pilots in the first place. Rely. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of what it is GPS provides you. And an inability of the people operating the platform to interpret and understand their systems accurately. It hurts the brain, really. It hurts the brain. And I mean, even the Civil Aviation Authority, again, it comes back out saying it should not affect the direct navigation of aircraft systems. Yeah, that's true. So you've got some uninformed pearl clutcher saying that the loss of GPS or jamming of GPS is going to cause aircraft to blow up and millions of people to die. When the Aviation Authority is like, well, no, it's one nav system of many, and if it goes offline or is degraded, it should not significantly degrade the performance of the aircraft or the navigation of the aircraft. And trust me, I've looked at integrated GPS nav systems over the years and asked questions about how they are supposed to, and looked into how they're supposed to operate in the denial of space operations, what sort of conditions that would then cause, how that would be recognized in the cockpit, how that should be recognized by people monitoring their systems. All right. Anyway, and the Aviation Authority makes a very fair statement that interference is primarily near conflict zones as a byproduct of military activity rather than necessarily being a deliberate act. Again, buried all the way at the bottom of the article. But it doesn't make news or make a worthwhile article if you put this right at the very top to calm people down. Anyway, what I will say about this statement here, though, if you lose GPS and your navigation systems then revert to other sources of positional accuracy, positional input, your positional accuracy will decrease. That is a given. Now, if you've lost your GPS positional accuracy, and I won't say position, your positional accuracy for any given reason, yes, the spacing between aircraft on air routes or in airspace should be adjusted to reflect that. And yes, if you're not capable of track keeping within certain tolerances, then you will not be granted permission to fly along certain air routes because the spacing between aircraft and not only going along the same air route, but between different air routes and different levels and things like that is a reflection of the accuracy of being able to maintain a 3D position in space. GPS is just the latest position keeping tool in the toolkit. And yeah, if people don't notice that that's happened, you're going to go a fair way before proximity alarms start going off because your GPS is given out. Your system monitoring is people being lazy is what it is. Can you unintentionally fly into the ground, water, or other obstacle because GPS has failed? Well, maybe if you're using a GPS approach into an airfield, but GPS should never have been considered a precision approach in the first place. It will put you into a 3D position in space, but it's not going to put you on a glide path. That's what ILS is for. That's what localizers are for. That's that's why you fly a beam onto the ground. That's what your Cat 2 and your different categories of ILS are for. They're not. The GPS will get you to the outer marker, or even to the middle marker. They'll get you to the point you can intercept the beam and ride the beam to the ground. Now, if your lateral and vertical positioning is off because the GPS signal has dropped out or become degraded, then yeah, maybe you might be far enough off track that you might impact things, but your terrain clearance has those waypoints have degrees of terrain clearance built into them. There are those approach plates, those approach paths are surveyed based on whether you're coming inbound or outbound from a beacon or from a waypoint. Therefore, the closer you get, the more accurate your positioning is going to be. Vertical terrain clearance. If it's a airfield with a tower, they'll have their radar terrain clearance charts overlaid, and so they'll be issuing terrain clearance based on radar return. They shouldn't be issuing terrain clearance based on ADS-B or other secondary radar returns. It could be returning on a primary paint at that point. If you're close enough to the ground that you're going to impact it, then and you're approaching an airfield that has a tower, they're going to likely have um, radar guidance available. If you're flying a GPS approach into an uncontrolled airfield or something like that, okay, maybe. But again, there should be enough information in the approach plates or in the approach data that you are fully aware of the obstacles in the vicinity. That's just, again, laziness on behalf of the crew. And it's an inflammatory statement that fundamentally has very little bearing on reality. so to speak. But why put it out? Why put the article out? Well, I reckon it's carrying a message, not so much about the GPS jamming and things like that. It's to keep the public wound up about belligerence in Ukraine. I don't think it helps. It's not accurate. I mean, there is accurate elements within this article, but the blatant propagandizing and rhetoric takes away from the actual valid points. If I can't believe this element of what's being said, if I can see that they're continually pointing back to the same source for multiple days, why should I believe that the new material being introduced is valid or carries the same weight? Boy who cried wolf, maybe. Last time there was a plane crash which killed political leaders in Europe. It wasn't GPS's fault, pilot error. That was um, the crash of the Polish aircraft uh, attending the Catton Wood massacre commemorations, where basically the pilots were told to land no matter what, despite the fact they said that it was not suitable to land in. And so they had a controlled flight into terrain because they lost positional accuracy because they couldn't see the ground and the workload and everything else. There wasn't a failure of GPS or anything. GPS didn't stop them from flying into the ground. It was pilot error. And so this stuff isn't going to change that. Doesn't change that. I mean, in hindsight, the captain should have exerted his captain's authority and likely would have been no longer allowed to fly again. But uh, as captain of the airframe, had authority to tell the politicians on board that no, they were not going to land at that airfield and that they're going to go to the alternate. That's the whole reason these policies and procedures apply. All right, now I'm going to get off my well-positioned in 3D space horse and we'll call it there while I go and reduce my blood pressure. All right, big thank you to everyone coming out today. What we have coming up next is going to be actually tonight. We're looking at running a gaming session for Prince of Persia Warrior Within. So again, that should be coming out on all the channels. Look forward to seeing everybody there. If you want to keep on top of the schedule, there is a schedule on Twitch which covers the gaming sessions. I will be putting the schedule into YouTube as well with scheduled streams, so if you can look ahead and see what's forecast as a planned stream and be able to see from there. For everybody else on the other endpoints, I would like to say, well, thank you for being here. Plus, thank you for everyone being here across the various channels. We look forward to, well, basically look forward to seeing you again next stream.